Congratulations to Leicester City, who wonderfully repeated the fairy tale of their league win a few years ago with their first FA Cup in over 140 years of history. However, two things happened at the FA Cup final. One was the taking the knee ceremony, which was booed by some fans, and the use of the Palestinian flag by some Leicester players after the game. So is this a matter of principle, or is it time to kick politics out of the beautiful game? I'm delighted to be joined by a true legend of the game, former Watford, Liverpool and England winger, John Barnes. Hello, John.
Hi, how are you doing?
I'm very well. First of all, what are your thoughts about flags on the pitch after the game in support of Palestine?
Well, first of all, the conversation as to politics in football is very nuanced. And there are certain instances, like, for example, taking the knee, Black Lives Matter, passing things along. People see things in different ways. Now, maybe the political Israeli situation is political, and that's something that's it's a very touchy subject, and maybe we shouldn't try to simplify it by doing that. But in terms of whether, you're taking the need to politicize Black Lives Matter, for me, it's not a political statement. It's more to do with the fact that, very much like say no to racism and passing the red card along, is not political. For me, neither is taking the knee. That's got nothing to do with politics. Obviously, the Palestinian situation is much more complicated than we make out. So as to whether you're on the side of the Palestinians or the Israelis is much too complex for us to try and simplify by showing Palestinian flags or by showing Israeli flags. So that's, for me, is a different subject than Black Lives Mattering and taking the knee.
Fine. So dealing with the flags in isolation, would you say that bringing a flag onto the pitch by one of the Leicester players was inappropriate, John?
I would think so. I would think so, because of course, had they brought Israeli flags on, because they may have felt, some people may feel that they're on the side of come down on the side of Israel in that matter, that would also have been not acceptable. So from that perspective, I think that without knowing the ins and outs of it, that probably overstepped the mark.
John, for all of the honours that you won in football, you would never have brought a flag onto the pitch. Why has football changed in this way, do you think?
Well, once again, you're looking at bringing a flag onto the pitch. However, there are other, like, for example, look at Marcus Rashford campaigning for school meals. Now, is that political? And is that a good thing? So therefore, footballers have a voice, so they should use their voice for good. But I think they have to understand the complex issues surrounding the debate before they just, from a knee-jerk reaction, just say we're going to support one or the other. And I don't think a lot of it isn't well thought out. So I think that football can do a lot in terms of highlighting problems, injustice, in the inequalities in the world, but I think they have to pick their battles.
Well, John, that's right. We'll come to BLM, which, as you rightly pointed out, is a separate cultural issue. But on the flags, is it virtue signalling, and ought those players to face sanctions?
Well, I don't think necessarily they should face sanctions. What they should do they have to be made aware of not just the responsibilities, but what the issues are, because of course, people who don't understand the complex situation with the Israel-Palestine conflict will all of a sudden say, I'm on the side of the Palestinians, I'm on the side of the Israelis, I'm on the side of the poor people who are being killed, be they Jews or be they Palestinians. And the political aspect, in many respects, people don't understand. So just to arbitrarily decide that I'm on one side or the other without knowing the issues, for me, is a little bit irresponsible.
Yes.
And I don't think in situations like that should happen.
If the greatest minds in sort of Arab-Israeli relations over several decades can't solve the problem, it's unlikely to be fixed by a Leicester midfielder.
Well, of course, and it's not just a question of it being fixed. It's a question of him, if he wants to show support for people who have been killed, and people have been killed on both sides. And of course, regardless of who's right or who's wrong, it's the non-elite people who suffer. Then of course you can support them and you can say this has to stop. And of course, if he or anybody then wants to virtue signal to then say that this has to stop the indiscriminate killing on one side or both sides, whichever way, that's fair enough. But then to take a political stance as to I'm supporting the Palestinians, I'm supporting the Israelis, we have to be careful with that.
Absolutely. John, at the beginning of the FA Cup final, all 22 players on the pitch took the knee in support of Black Lives Matter, which of course is a sentence we can all get behind and support. There was booing. Now, what was your reaction to that? Why do you think those people were booing?
Well, very much like when they booed at Millwall. because a lot of people may interpret that as either tearing down statues, defunding the police, and of course some aspects of Black Lives Matter, the movement, possibly may look to for those extremes, which I don't support, defunding the police necessarily at all, in fact.
So you support the sentiment, but not the organisation behind that particular brand.
Well, the sentiment of I can't see how anybody cannot support the sentiment
Absolutely.
of Black Lives Mattering. So it really depends on what spin you want to put on it as to whether you agree with it or you don't agree with it. So, and of course, some people may decide, as Wilfred Zaha, that he won't take a knee for whatever reason. And in many respects, it does nothing. All it does is to highlight the problem. What are we going to do now we've highlighted the problem? What is the tangible difference going to be made to people's lives? So taking the knee means nothing, because in 20 years' time, if you're still taking the knee, but there's no tangible change in the inner cities in terms of, housing and education and just basic, respect for Black people, taking a knee is not going to do anything. As when we've passed this sign along for the last 20 years in the Champions League saying no to racism, nothing seems to have changed. In many respects, it's meaningless.
Is there a danger that BLM, this gesture, which, as you've mentioned, is quite on the surface rather than the important necessary change we need in our society, could be counterproductive when it comes to race relations? Could it be setting back race relations, do you think?
Well, I don't think once again, it depends on people's perception of what it is actually about. If people want to interpret it, which I don't, and most people don't, about defunding the police and Marxism and stuff like that, then it isn't counterproductive. But in terms of it being productive, I don't think it'll be productive at all. It'll just be the same as it always has been. And we may convince ourselves that there's change because we're looking at these, what you may call virtue signaling, and I call it tokenism. We may feel that we're going in the right direction because the conversation, when we talk about starting the conversation or having the conversation, this is to highlight the problem for the conversation to start. The conversation hasn't started. And it's been going on for now 6-7 months. The conversation hasn't started.
The danger
is just like highlighting it.
That's right. The danger is that everyone takes the knee. They all feel better about themselves and nothing changes, John. And it is all about change, of course. If you had played on Saturday, John, and you've seen more than one FA Cup final, would you have taken the knee?
I personally wouldn't, but that doesn't mean I don't believe in the Black Lives Matter in terms of my interpretation of it. You see, Wilfred Zaha standing up with in many respects, it doesn't matter what you do. It is meaningless unless, so I would have stood there with two hands up in the air, one hand up in the air, I would have taken a knee, I would have sat down. It is meaningless unless we're going to have change. So once again, me saying that I may not have taken the knee doesn't mean that I don't support the cause and feel that something should be done. But in many respects, I know that this in many respects is just a token gesture, and because I've seen what's been going on for the last 20 years in passing this, every Champions League match, passing this red card along saying no to racism or show racism the red card, and nothing is being done, I can see us taking the knee for the next 10 years and us really not doing anything apart from taking a knee.
John, it's terribly important there is change, but notwithstanding that, do you think it's time that footballers stuck to playing football?
No, I think it's not necessarily, because if that was the case, government policy towards school meals for underprivileged kids would not have been changed by Marcus Rashford. But what they have to do is they have to highlight really important causes. And if they feel they can really make a change and not just talk about what's right for themselves in terms of banning referees in Bulgaria or football fans or Romanians, talk about what's going on in the inner cities for kids like themselves who are much less well off than them.
What a brilliant message, John. It's all about real change, not gestures. I'm going to ask you two questions about football because you are a footballing legend, a hero. First of all, Saturday's game, what a win for Leicester. They've lived the dream twice now.
Absolutely, and I'm not surprised because since Brendan Rodgers has been there, they've shown a level of consistency that they can challenge the big boys. Of course, they are not as big a team as obviously the big six, if you like. However, on the pitch, they're equally as good, equally as capable. That's why they are where they are. And it wasn't by luck. They played really well. I could see Leicester not winning the cup, not qualifying for the Champions League, and then their season just petering out. Whereas now, I can see them finishing the top four and winning the qualifying for the Champions League and winning the FA Cup, and maybe Chelsea are the ones who may miss out. But I'm pleased for Brendan Rodgers because I have a lot of respect for him.
And finally, John, your club, Liverpool FC, might just have achieved Champions League football thanks to a goalkeeper, not for saving but scoring a goal.
Well, of course, in modern football, when that has been a feature of modern football, I would say for the last 10 years, I shudder to think if this was around when I was playing, how many times Bruce Grobbelaar would have come up to score goals. Because I can tell you, Bruce used to do that when they weren't allowed out of the area. But if he was allowed, Bruce would have been in double figures. But it's great to see, Alisson come and do that. And also the interview he gave after with his humility and his respect and his love. and his humility. I mean, it was incredible, and it keeps the dream alive of us finishing fourth.
John, a huge privilege to have you on the programmes. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on a range of issues. The brilliant John Barnes there, of course, former Watford, Liverpool and England winger. So much more to come. After this, we're going to crunch the numbers on that Indian variant.